The F-35 was supposed to save money. Instead, it became the most expensive weapons program in human history, more than $1.7 trillion. Enough money to buy entire air forces, enough money to build multiple aircraft carrier fleets, and after decades of development, people are still asking the same question. Was it worth it? Most people think the F-35 became expensive because engineers failed. Others blame delays, some blame politicians, but the real story begins much earlier. Long before the first aircraft ever flew, long before the first prototype was built, it began with a decision that looked brilliant on paper and nearly impossible in reality. The decision to build one fighter jet for 3 completely different military services: the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps. That single decision would shape everything that followed. This is the story of how one fighter jet became America's biggest procurement gamble. By the 1990s, the US military had a problem. The Air Force operated its own aircraft. The Navy operated different aircraft. The Marines used different aircraft again. Each fleet required separate training, separate maintenance, separate supply chains, separate budgets. Everything was duplicated, and duplication cost money. Lots of money. Military planners believed they had found a solution. Instead of developing separate aircraft, why not create one aircraft family? One platform, one supply chain, one training system, one production line. The concept sounded revolutionary, and if it worked, it could save billions. The project became known as the Joint Strike Fighter program, and eventually, the winner would become the F-35 Lightning II. At the time, it looked like the future. One fighter, shared by everyone, cheaper, smarter, more efficient, at least that was the plan. The problem appeared almost immediately, because the 3 services didn't actually want the same aircraft. The Air Force wanted a stealth fighter capable of replacing older aircraft. The Navy wanted a carrier-based aircraft strong enough to survive violent carrier landings, and the Marine Corps wanted something completely different, a stealth fighter capable of short takeoffs and vertical landings. In other words, a fighter jet that could land like a helicopter. That single requirement changed everything. To make vertical landings possible, engineers had to redesign large portions of the aircraft. A lift fan, special doors, different internal structures, different weight distribution, different engineering priorities, and suddenly, the dream of one common aircraft became much harder. Every change made one service happy and made another service unhappy. Every compromise created new engineering challenges. The aircraft wasn't being pulled in one direction, it was being pulled in 3. Most people think cost overruns happen because someone makes a mistake, but the F-35 reveals something different. Sometimes costs explode because nobody made a mistake. The program was simply trying to do too much. Imagine building one vehicle that must function as a race car, a pickup truck, and an armored military vehicle. At the same time, each role demands something different, and every compromise reduces efficiency. The F-35 faced the same problem. Engineers were trying to satisfy 3 different customers using one aircraft family. The more commonality they demanded, the more difficult engineering became. The more unique features they added, the more costs increased. There was no perfect answer, only expensive trade-offs. And those trade-offs began piling up, year after year. Then another challenge emerged: software. Modern fighter jets are flying computers, and the F-35 pushed that concept further than almost any aircraft before it. The aircraft combines information from radar, infrared sensors, electronic warfare systems, data links, targeting systems, and countless other sensors. All of that information must be processed instantly and displayed to the pilot as one complete picture.
Target acquired.
The goal was simple: help the pilot understand the battlefield faster than the enemy. The execution was far more difficult. Millions of lines of software code had to work together perfectly. Every update required testing. Every bug created delays. Every delay increased costs. What many people didn't realize was that software was becoming just as important as the aircraft itself. The F-35 wasn't simply a fighter jet. It was one of the most advanced software projects in military history, and software projects rarely stay on schedule. Then came one of the most controversial decisions in the entire program. Production began before testing was finished. The logic seemed reasonable. Build aircraft now, fix issues later. Deliver aircraft faster. Save years of development time. Instead, the opposite happened. As testing continued, engineers discovered problems. Aircraft already built required modifications. Systems required updates. Components needed replacement. The military was effectively building and testing at the same time. Supporters argued it accelerated deployment. Critics argued it created billions in additional costs. Both sides had valid arguments. But one thing became clear: the program was becoming more expensive than anyone originally expected. As costs increased, criticism grew. Politicians questioned the budget, analysts questioned the strategy, journalists questioned the future of the program. But by then, the F-35 had become something much larger than a fighter jet. Factories across multiple countries were producing components. Thousands of workers depended on the program. Allied nations had already committed to purchasing aircraft. Military planning was built around future F-35 fleets. At that point, cancelling the program became almost impossible. The question was no longer, should we continue? The question became, what replaces it? And nobody had a realistic answer. The program had become too large, too connected, too important, to simply abandon. By the early 2010s, the F-35 had become one of the most criticized military programs in the world. New headlines appeared almost every year. Cost overruns, software delays, maintenance problems, schedule slips. The criticism became so common that many people began asking the same question: why not just cancel it? At first glance, that sounds reasonable. If a program becomes too expensive, you stop spending money. But defense procurement rarely works that way, because by this point, the F-35 was no longer just an aircraft. It had become an entire ecosystem. Thousands of companies were involved in production. Factories across multiple countries were building components. Engine manufacturers were producing power plants, software teams were writing code. Military bases were preparing for future squadrons, pilots were already training, and allied nations were placing orders. The United Kingdom, Italy, Australia, Norway, the Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, and many others all had invested billions of dollars into the program. For many of these countries, the F-35 wasn't simply a fighter purchase. It was a long-term strategic commitment, a commitment to shared technology, shared logistics, shared training, and closer military cooperation with the United States. Cancelling the aircraft would create enormous problems, not just for Washington, but for allies around the world. And that's when the debate started to change. The question was no longer, is the F-35 perfect? Everyone already knew it wasn't. The new question became, what replaces it? No alternative aircraft existed, no backup program was ready, and starting over would likely cost hundreds of billions more. Suddenly, continuing the program looked less risky than cancelling it. The F-35 had reached a point that many large defense programs eventually reach, a point where the cost of stopping becomes almost as high as the cost of continuing. And once that happens, a program becomes extremely difficult to kill, not because it's perfect, not because everyone loves it, but because too much has already been built around it. The F-35 had become more than a fighter jet. It had become part of the foundation of Western air power, and that made it almost impossible to walk away. Lost in the controversy is a simple fact. The F-35 can do things previous fighters could not. Its stealth capabilities make detection more difficult. Its sensors provide extraordinary battlefield awareness. Its ability to gather and distribute information changed how many military planners think about air combat. Supporters argue these advantages justify the cost. Critics remain unconvinced. They point to maintenance costs, readiness challenges, and decades of overruns. Both sides continue debating the aircraft today, and that debate probably won't end anytime soon. Because the F-35 isn't an obvious success, and it isn't an obvious failure. It's something much more complicated.